But I do think that in the chicken or egg dilemma, that there is more causation from cultural decline that feeds into economic decline, and economic decline then leads to greater cultural decline. And I believe that this creates a negative feedback loop that not only is potentially corrosive for the American experiment, but has already proven to be so.
Welcome to Faith and Law. I'm Brad Dacus, president and founder of the Pacific Justice Institute. On today's show, we're going to be addressing with an economist and also someone who is very committed to his faith, his family, the issue of to what extent does faith, family, freedom, morals, character, integrity have to do with financial prosperity, both for us individually, but even as our nation and our nation's history and heritage. To help me do this right now, we're very blessed to have a gentleman, David Bahnsen, to join us now. He's an economist. He's an author of many books. Thank you for joining us, David. I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Well, Brad, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be with you.
So I want to start off with our first question, which is, what poses the greater threat to America's future? Economic decline or cultural decline?
You know, it's a very good question, Brad, because there obviously is a both and component to it. They're not mutually exclusive. But I do think that in the chicken or egg dilemma, that there is more causation from cultural decline that feeds into economic decline, and economic decline then leads to greater cultural decline. And I believe that this creates a negative feedback loop that not only is potentially corrosive for the American experiment, but has already proven to be so. I think that much of the cultural decline that we experienced out of the godforsaken decade that was the 1960s led to certain elements of economic decline that are right now caught in that negative feedback loop, a sort of vicious cycle, if you will. So I don't think the answer is one is worse than the other. I think that one feeds on the other, and then they both feed on each other, and that's the real truth of the matter. Charles Murray wrote a book called Coming Apart in 2013 that looked at some of the elements, and he isolated his data set to white America to avoid any kind of racial connotations or data that might confuse the thing. He just isolated it to white America and was able to demonstrate where certain elements of cultural decline then led to other elements of economic decline, and what that has meant in that subset of American life. And it's unbelievable what we see in American divide right now, sociologically and culturally, around some of these economic categories. But I think that all of them generally start with an initial undermining of the moral fabric that is needed to sustain moral culture.
Okay. Well, what actually creates prosperity?
Prosperity defined as Christians would define it, the good life. Prosperity defined in a very narrow economic vocabulary. Those are the interesting questions, right? I believe that if someone said, I define prosperity as a very wealthy person, regardless of their spiritual, personal, psychological, emotional, familial, cultural surroundings, then you could very well have prosperous people who are miserable. But no, I believe that a prosperous life, a common good, and one that I think the language that we've historically talked about in the context of the true, beautiful, and good is a combination of both material and immaterial components. And this reflects the incarnate nature of Christ, that Christ was fully God the spiritual dimension, the immaterial dimension, matter, and fully man, the material and physical dimension, matters. So I define prosperity as a more comprehensive human flourishing.
Now, you mentioned how cultural decline feeds economic decline, which then goes back and feeds more cultural decline. Can you give us like some examples of that so we can understand how that actually comes into play?
I think that out of family values, there was a time in which it was viewed that there was certain expectations of a young male adult and a sexual purity and whatnot. And then when one would misbehave and be in a position where they had gotten a woman pregnant and now decide to not marry her, what you now have is a cultural and moral category that has now led to an economic issue where there's a single mom, there's a child who's not going to have two parents, there is the potential of two poverties instead of one non-poverty in terms of households. And then out of those desperations of economic issues, it can lead to welfare and dependency on the state and a breakdown of human dignity, a breakdown of self-reliance and self-worth that can lead to bad decision making. There's a lot of addiction that comes up in those phrases. But see, all of it came about as sort of this circularity of cultural issues intertwined with economic ones. But I don't want to leave it there. I think you have to look at the positive feedback loop. What is the greatest antidote to poverty? Are there a lot of people at genuine abject poverty where there is a husband and a wife and children together? Isn't that a framework most of the time for the incentive to work, to provide, to make good decisions, to be more of a steward, responsible? Bad things can still happen in any situation. There can still be addiction and abuse and other horrible things that happen on this side of glory. But my point being that as a trend sociologically, which is what you're asking about, that there's a negative feedback loop often at play with culture and economics, and there's a positive feedback loop that could be at play. And our job needs to be to facilitate the conditions for positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I know as a matter of policy in the Great Society, LBJ formed all these government programs which expedited the breakdown of the family in the eyes of many, where they said, we're going to give you money and welfare, but if you get married to this guy over here, then you're not going to qualify for welfare. So there's this huge incentive in the inner cities for people not to get married, and then they have these kids brought up, and they end up higher crime rate, drug issues, a lack of discipline of the children. We've seen that with just in recent history with a lot of the rioting and vandalism and danger, and people saying, where's the parents here? In addition, I know in our society today, many from the left would like to say, well, poverty is actually racial. But a study was done, I think Thomas Sowell cited this one in one of his books, where the reality is there's a much higher correlation of wealth versus non-wealth if you're married and you have a family, a nuclear family, irrespective of what demographic you came from. You have actually a very high likelihood of not being in poverty just by abiding by those principles that God has laid out for us as our loving Heavenly Father, versus going another way, which is what you just talked about. And of course, it has economic impact not only on the individuals, but then also on society, because then we have increase of crime, and that costs victims, costs for jails, et cetera, et cetera. How can a nation remain prosperous? We're very prosperous in America today, David, as you know. But can we remain prosperous after abandoning a moral and spiritual foundation?
Well, the reality is that we can't, but we don't know the exact timing, and these things are not binary. There's marginal components to them. And so what I mean by that is this. There's a continuum at which our disobedience leads to negative consequences. But I don't want to take away from the fact that there's a pretty rich heritage and a lot of borrowed capital. And just like someone who squanders away the inheritance, the larger the inheritance, the more they have to squander. So you could be blowing away a lot of nest egg, and it could take a long time to do that if the nest egg was big enough, right? The heritage of our country, that unique synthesis of religious and economic liberty that serves at the bedrock of a constitutional republic, it's provided us a lot of capital. Now we may be burning some of that capital, and the indebtedness that we have as a nation, some of the cultural decay, all of these things are eroding. But that's different than me predicting cats and dogs falling out of the sky tomorrow. What I want to do, President Reagan famously said that there was, no blessing that we could take for granted would be there forever. We have to work to sustain those things, and yet at the same time, I'm grateful that we have the DNA that we have. But I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize that we can't take for granted these things will be sustained if we get away from the principles that are necessary to sustain them.
Now, we talk about the family, the role the family plays. What about the church? So, if every church closed its doors tomorrow, what would America look like in 20 years?
Europe, and I don't mean that in a good way. Europe, by the way, also had a rich legacy and a lot of capital to burn, but they burned it. But it took a long time. And Europe, Western Europe as a continent and a geographical region has existed a lot longer than the American experiment as we get ready to celebrate our 250th year. And yet, any of us who have spent time in some of the great European cities knows that there's two things that you really take away. Unbelievable beauty in some of the buildings, and an unbelievable loneliness as so many of these buildings, cathedrals, churches are empty. The secularization of the continent has led to a stagnation. There is no appetite for risk taking. Their economic mentality is dramatically different. They are content to basically function as a binary society with about half of the people living off of the largesse of the other half. In terms of that welfare state and what that does to the psyche of the citizenry, it leads to all sorts of malfunction in family, and in fact upside down demographics where you see this, by the way, in various Asian cultures too, but more or less where religiosity is where people are incentivized and prone to bear children. So if America were to continue down a path of secularization and de-churching, obviously your hypothetical isn't realistic about it all being tomorrow, but the gradual decline of evangelical churches, that's not a hypothetical. Your question there taps into something that is happening. We need a resurgence, a revival, a reformation, healthy church life. And we don't just need it for the sake of soul saving, although evangelism is awfully important here too. But we need it to preserve moral culture, to preserve hope, to preserve longevity. There is something utterly intertwined about healthy church life and productive decision making for the future.
So I hear Bible sales are up 36%. Gen Zs, the youngest of the adult population, they attend church now more than the baby boomers. And it's totally flipped. Millennials attend church more than the Gen Xers. So it seems that we've got something positive happening here. What's your take on it? Do you see a positive that could spiritually, that could also impact us economically, maybe even morally, to look at our spending as a nation and demand more from our politicians when it comes to debt spending and increasing the federal deficit?
Well, we're going down a different path there, and that's interesting how those things may kind of connect to one another. But let's just start with the basic question: do we see a resurgence that's positive in certain church activity, religious activity, etc.? And I would say I'm a generally optimistic person, and I agree with you that the prima facie read of the data suggests so. I don't want to get carried away with this. I think that, Brad, there is a little time needed to evaluate, are we seeing a kind of backlash against postmodernism where the kind of searching of the millennials has led to some Gen Zers that want to actually find something. And I'm hopeful. Anecdotally, I'm a Gen Xer and live in New York City that is not thought of as a very high churched community, but a lot of people know the success of Tim Keller's ministry after 9/11. It brought an awful lot of people that were climbers and searchers and very high performing people, but that they wanted to understand some of the great questions of life better. And Tim Keller's ministry in New York tapped into that. But I attend a church now where, even though I'm only 52 years old, I'm one of the oldest people there. And every Sunday, I'm just blown away at the young people that are there in droves, 4 services a weekend at a couple of different Manhattan campuses. Very ambitious people, energetic people, young, excited, but really searching for depth from the pulpit, for the great questions of life, that want to understand things better. I always am very encouraged by that. The only thing I want to say, and it's not a rain on the parade moment, but it's just to kind of keep the honesty going through the thread. I don't believe it will be enough if we get church attendance up in the next 10 years. We have to get the faithfulness of the people in the pews and the people delivering the sermons up. Mere church attendance won't do it. There has to be not just revival, but reformation, not just showing up, but discipleship. And so there's some signs for optimism, but there's a big task ahead.
What extent do you see these as having economic consequences?
Well, for all of the reasons that we've talked about, I think all of them have economic repercussions, but they require people to understand the kind of philosophy behind all of that. You know, there is something intrinsic in the Christian faith, the creational truths of the Christian religion. And something kind of related to this is what I was speaking about at the event that you and I both spoke at there in Florida earlier in the year. Christian theology uniquely promotes productive, creative, innovative activity because it believes in a creator God who made mankind in his image. And that theological understanding promotes the activities that produce goods and services that meet the needs of humanity, that help us realize our hopes and dreams, that of course, by definition, foster economic growth and a higher standard of living. And then it comes with certain behavioral activities that are conducive to economic growth. Societies that have higher degrees of trust, higher degrees of morality, they are able to sustain more fidelity to contracts, to agreements. These things all have a cost in them when they are violated. And I think that there is a unique component of a Christian society that really maintains the ability to create superlative economic growth. And then inversely, various secular societies that lose the ability to do so. Now, sometimes people will hear this and say, are you saying that outside of a Christian society, people can't go produce goods and services? I'm certainly not saying that. And we know the counterfactual. There are plenty of very lazy evangelicals non-productive mediocrities in the Christian world, and there are plenty of incredibly gifted, talented, innovative non-Christian folks. But what I'm saying is that the Christians who are non-productive are violating their own worldview, and the non-Christians who are productive are borrowing from the Christian worldview. It is a byproduct of a common grace, but they are still nevertheless operating as image bearers of God, even though they're not self-aware or self-conscious of it. When you bring that self-consciousness in to a holistic biblical fidelity, it drives economic growth, activity, obedience. It's just a wonderful vision for society.
Yeah, it seems that there is, though, a correlation of the morals of society, and particularly Christian societies, and prosperity. We've seen that throughout history. I don't think it's any accident, as we've seen it play out. Um, and yet, can free enterprise, though, we've seen this, like a lot of free enterprise, say, starting in China. Um, and yet, can free enterprise survive where people are afraid to speak freely? This is the reason many people think China does not have a good long-term future, because they do not have basic free speech and individual freedom and liberty. What say you?
Well, again, similar to an earlier answer on a different question, these things are marginal. You cannot thrive. Civic freedom, religious freedom, and economic freedom are all different categories, but all of them are optimized when the other ones are present. And so a society that has all three is going to be most optimized for flourishing, and one that has two of the three or one of the three is going to be handcuffed. China went for many years with zero of the three. And marginal expansion of economic freedom without religious freedom or civic freedom is better than no element of economic freedom, but it is not good enough. It is not going to sustain the conditions for human flourishing. It's one of the things I don't want to get too in the weeds economically, but one of the things I laugh at is how many times I'm asked, well, is the dollar going to lose its reserve currency? And are we worried about China eating our lunch? And I always ask people, do you really believe a currency where the people are not allowed the flight of capital could ever become the world's choice for reserve? China has greater economic freedom for people inside the country than it used to, but you can't get money in and out of the country. I mean, why would anyone believe that currency represents a robust future? At the end of the day, the freedom of speech, the freedom of mobility, these things help optimize those other economic freedoms. And I believe that the phrase we use around this is a necessary but not sufficient condition. You need economic liberty necessarily, but some form of private property or profit motive incentives, as necessary as those things are, they are not sufficient for the optimal conditions of human flourishing, which further require moral culture, religious liberty, civic freedoms, etc. That, of course, being the vision you and I care so much about, the vision of our founders in a constitutional republic.
What happens to a society, David, where when parents lose authority over their children to the state?
Well, it invites so many maladies, it's hard to know where even to start. I mean, for one thing, as you know full well, I'm unaware of any examples where parental rights are compromised that a whole host of other civil liberties are also not compromised. Generally, societies that start to reign tyrannically on the rights of parents are also reigning tyrannically on the rights of employees and of employers and of all host of other characters. It's a bedrock of basic civilization. We saw this during the peak woke insanity of 5 to 10 years ago. Um, some of these forced things happening within the transgender movement and whatnot, school districts wanting to basically de-parent the mom and dad from their jurisdiction in the matter, and that was happening at the same time that employees were being forced to go through HR indoctrinations and just all sorts of other silly stuff. And the pendulum has swung back a little bit in some of those categories, but I'm not sure they're entirely different incidents. I think that they're symptomatic of the same issue. So I'm with you that that stuff is ground zero, and it's problematic in and of itself, and yet it isn't in and of itself. It's accompanied by other tyrannies as well.
Yeah, I agree, and it takes down society. It was interesting. It was a study done. I think it was actually during the Obama administration by the Department of Health and Human Services that actually found that children are economically and statistically better off if they remain in a moderately abusive family than if they're torn from their family and put into foster care. That's how bad our system is right now. And of course, what happens to that child when that individual child is not likely to graduate from school, not to reach their potential? Our society does not reach its potential, and we're talking about a massive numbers of kids that are wrongfully taken from families. So it definitely it definitely has an impact. I agree 100% with what you just said. Now, oftentimes Christians think to themselves, especially younger generations, the Gen Zs. We talked about how a lot of them are coming to Christ, but a lot of them are thinking socialism is a great thing, and they're thinking, this is good, democratic socialism, and we need to spread the wealth. Capitalism is terrible. That's where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Capitalism is terrible. We need to spread the wealth. What do Christians? I say specifically Christians. Um, what what do they most often misunderstand about capitalism, a free enterprise economy?
Well, I think one of the problems is that it isn't a very well branded term itself. I talk about this a lot. Anyone who would give any definition of capitalism would be defining it as some sort of laissez faire version of economics, where there is private property, private ownership, where the state is not involved in the means of production. And I believe in all of those things, the profit motive, rule of law, and so forth. And yet none of that to me is an ism about capital. I believe in capital as a tool in advancing the human spirit, the productive work that we are going to do. And I believe very much in private property as necessary for economic calculation to help produce goods and services that advance the needs of humanity. The reality is that I don't believe any of the studies that show young people like socialism and dislike capitalism. I believe that young people dislike what they have been taught about free enterprise and what they see. It is incumbent upon us as defenders of a market economy to actually consistently advocate for a market economy and attach it to the necessary moral bedrock that we do not believe the means are the end. I believe in profit motive and I believe in GDP growth, but never has it crossed my mind that the reason I believe in GDP growth is because in and of itself, the numbers on the page are the end objective. It's that the numbers are meant to capture some form of economic growth that it itself is leading to greater human flourishing. So I think that we have failed on the right to make the case for a market economy attached to human dignity. And this is one of the great burdens of my adult life. Post 2008, I believe that there's been a seminal moment. Bernie Sanders existed, Brad, before 2008, but no one had ever heard of him. He was an obscure socialist congressman in Vermont. He became a household name and a viable presidential candidate. AOC became a celebrity. In a post 2008 world, where people believed that those of us who are free marketeers lost the moral high ground. And I don't think that we can defend markets rooted to a secular rationalism or an atheistic humanism. I think we can defend markets attached to a Christian anthropology, a Christian understanding of the human person as an image bearer of God. And we have got to do a better job resisting crony capitalism, which is what I actually think young people are turned off by. It's controversial these days, and people don't like it when occasionally I have to be critical of the current administration. But one of the things that I'm fit to be tight about is this federal ownership of some of the companies, the government taking equity positions in certain companies. It muddies the water. It's the government picking winners and losers, and it creates cynicism in young people that the game is rigged. Government subsidies and favoritism and things of that nature. Those of us who believe in free enterprise need to believe in free enterprise. And yes, the historical record should be defended. What has happened in totalitarian states, what has happened in central planning states. We need to make the philosophical argument for why markets work, incentives, the knowledge problem. There's all sorts of very, very elemental things here. But fundamentally, if we try to divorce it from a moral argument, we're not going to keep young people animated.
Now, what freedoms do Americans take for granted the most today, in your opinions?
It's a great question. I think that I'm sad to say it's not just one. First of all, I will say this about markets, and this applies to the thing we were just talking about. When people are critical of markets or think they just lead to rich people getting richer, you notice most people say that on social media with a phone in a really nice coffee shop. Markets are bad self-promoters. Markets do so many things so quickly and so invisibly for our quality of life that they often actually they create the vehicles by which people will use to criticize them. So we take for granted the blessings of prosperity. You asked about prosperity earlier. That we take for granted these blessings because we're so enriched by them. And I think that, of course, the national security that we've enjoyed, the freedoms that we have, I'm not sure that we are taught anymore the way maybe you and I were as younger people to fully appreciate the legacy of what bloodshed was at play to secure the liberty we enjoy today. I think a greater K through 12 training on the basics of economics. You mentioned a Christian worldview attached to this. It's a passion of mine to teach economics to young people. I'll quickly tout that I have a totally, completely free soup to nuts economics course at Bahnsen.com that over 10,000 students, homeschool, Christian school, moms and dads have just taken on their own in economics, where I'm not starting off with theorems and formulas and charts. I'm starting with the basic principles that need to be taught. I think it's the right way to foundationally understand economics. But we need to do the same thing with civics. We need to do the same thing with law. People need to understand the bedrock of law and why some of the constitutional principles we believe in are so important. There's a lot of efforts out there in worldview training, but those things I think need to scale better and ultimately reinforce these things that you're talking about to help people not take them for granted.
Yeah, I think that's great. You've got that training. It's Bahnsen.com. That's spelled BAHNSEN.com. Is that right?
I wish it were spelled as simply as it's pronounced, but Bahnsen.com, BAHNSEN, and you'll see it right there on the homepage. A totally free course, 30 lectures, the syllabuses, the final exam, the quizzes. the all the reading materials. It's a real comprehensive semester-long course in a box available online. And look, I'm sure there's plenty of other good material there, but that course means the world to me because I believe that that's the age that I really want to see people start to understand these things and understand them as connected to creational norms, connected to this basic Christian worldview.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know we at the Pacific Justice Institute, we've developed a two-part training video entitled Faith in the Workplace to train business owners and also materials to help workers know what their rights are to live their faith, to share their faith, to evangelize their employees, their customers, the community through their company, through their business, or through their position. And I think there's just a real need to, God wants us to live our faith in everything we do, um, including our finances, including the workplace. And there's just a real need for that. So many people see their Christianity as something for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half Sunday morning, um, and they sort of leave it at that. But there's just so much in the way biblical principles that can come in to affect us, and in so many ways. One interesting thing I saw about some of your books that you prepared, dealing with a number of issues. Um, as far as what we talked about, but the specific issue I thought was sort of interesting. Is a book, your latest book, Profit from the Profit: The Past, Present, and Future of Dividend Growth Investing. This is a little off topic, but I'd like to give people a little gold nugget to take away in a practical sense, David. So, what's the basic takeaway that you're presenting in that book for people to appreciate that they could benefit from right now?
Well, my firm is a private wealth management firm that manages over $10 billion of client capital. And we have built our investment philosophy around something called dividend growth investing. I believe in it with every ounce of breath in my body, and have devoted my adult professional life to this. And I happen to think we do it very well. It's funny, in this new book coming out, it isn't just an investment book and markets book, but I have a whole appendix in the book trying to make a theological case for it as well. So I'll leave people in suspense for that. But yes, it is essentially a book. It's my second book on the subject, but I think it's a little bit more elaborated and updated and so forth than the first book I wrote, which came out about 8 years ago now. And yeah, the argument is that we want to buy profitable companies that are sharing their profits with us, and focus on something that's more real and material and repeatable versus speculative. And so it's a apologetic for dividend growth investing, profit from the profit, and I'm really excited for it to come out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it myself. I was a finance undergrad, took a lot of economics, took courses on investment analysis, traditional fundamentals of investing, and so that's just sort of something I always personally appreciate because I know a lot of people are swayed. I mean, I don't know many people invested in SpaceX, and maybe they got on it early, and I think that's what it's called, SpaceX. Elon, okay, and it's it just went up dramatically, and now it's gone down some, and so many people just they go and invest on, I call it fad investing, if you will. They look for the herd, they follow the herd, even if it's over a cliff sometimes. So I think it's just, to me, it's just really important for people of faith, in particular, to have good common sense for good long-term investing, minimize risk, maximize return, and be prudent and wise. And I really like that principle. So I think the book is probably going to be a big blessing to a lot of people. You didn't ask me to mention that, but it's part of my heart is I want to help people. That's one reason I started Pacific Justice Institute. I want to help people. I want to help churches, families, communities all across America without charge. And but when I see other ways of helping people, I can't hold that. I can't keep it back. And so I'm really glad you wrote that book. I know it's going to be very helpful. So, what must America preserve, David, if future generations are to enjoy uh, even greater prosperity than what we have today?
We have to preserve the constitutional republic, and the constitutional republic can't be preserved without gratitude. We have to have gratitude for what it is. We have to have fidelity to it. When I hear people of either party, degrading the idea of separation of powers, degrading some of the principles of the Constitution, I think that it does not bode well for the future. We spent a lot of time in our conversation today talking about these things. But a good summary of it would be that synthesis of productive living with moral culture is the need of the hour. That when we talk about loneliness epidemic or mental health issues or all the tribalization that we see, a lot of this is most visible in young men. These things are remedied through the combination of the very things we've talked about today, that people find purpose when they get right spiritually, and out of that purpose they find vocational activity, productive efforts that feed their soul. These things are the bedrock to American civilization. So a gratitude for what we have and a real investment into the future is the need of the hour. But these things are not just platitudes. They are all very actionable, and of course they're not exhaustive. We could talk about the need for our marriages to stay healthy and for us to have big, robust, healthy families and so forth. There's a vision. I think, we need more people entering law. We need more people entering finance. We need more people in technology. There's so many ways we could go with it, but at the basic principle, we need to preserve constitutional republic, because out of that bedrock comes the synthesis of economic and religious liberty.
Yeah, I know so many Christians in our society today have not learned to really bring their faith with them to the workplace, bring their faith with them in terms of their policies, even how they vote. Oftentimes they'll vote for their own personal self-interest and won't ask the bigger question, what is really the loving thing to do? The love of Christ is what's to control us. And that means not just caring about ourselves and our own little interest group, but what's best for America. And I'm personally hoping that we're going to have more Christians be more resolved to vote and support those politicians that have righteous policies when it comes to these biblical principles of property ownership, being against debt and debt spending, which is basically stealing from our children. As we apply our faith to how we live, how we work, how we invest, we're all the better for it. It's just that simple. Just that simple. David, I so appreciate you and all you're doing. It's been a real privilege to have you on this program. And I just want to say to you, David, anyone else watching this, but if we can ever help you in anything we can, in any way, if your clients, you have many, many clients out there, if you know of any of your clients that are having issues with regard to religious freedom in the workplace or in their community or their church, or parents' rights issues or sanctity of life, I want you to always feel free to send them our way. We have the biggest footprint of its kind across the United States, 37 offices coast to coast, do all our work without charge, and we don't just cherry pick a few high-profile cases. We really want to make sure everyone gets help, and I know you have that same heart. So if we can help you, anyone you know, David, please let us know. I love what you're doing. I respect you, and folks, I just want to encourage you all to, once again, go to his website, get his information. It's solid, it's level-headed. That's what we need today. It's once again, it's at Bahnsen, Bahnsen, BAHNSEN.com. You get some great resources there. And also, of course, I want to encourage you, if you want to take a look at our resources that we have, or if you need legal assistance, folks, we can help you, or you'd like to find out how you can become a part of what we're doing here at Pacific Justice Institute, just go to our website, pji.org, pji.org. David, thank you again for being on this program, and Keep up the great work helping so many, as well as our nation. Thank you.
Thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. Thank you.